Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with all of you. Well, George has set me up very well. Standards are extremely important, and they are a form of trust. So my objectives today are to take what George spoke about and take it one step further and speak specifically about the ISO 20387 standard, which is the general requirements for biobanking standard, and then discuss something of its implementation, and really to think about this in terms of setting it up for the value proposition, which is ultimately what it's going to be all about when, especially in industry, where everything really is a value proposition. And then how does this particular standard work within what I'll call the biobanker's toolbox? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a few minutes. And then some items that are in the hopper for what's next. So to put some of this in context, George made a allusion to ISO TC 276, which is the International Technical Committee of ISO for biotechnology. And within that, within ISO TC 276, and you can see the scope here, but I'm not going to read it to you, there was a working group too on biobanks and bioresources. And again, this group was particularly focused on research as the goal in terms of the initial use of the standards. And we worked in conjunction with those who worked in, for example, TC 212, which was more focused on clinical standards. But as you can see, there are currently 31 member countries who actively participate, 19 observers, and we've published 27 standards thus far. So we have been pretty busy since 2013. So I've just said that we've been pretty busy. Why have we been pretty busy? And what is actually the problem that we're trying to solve? And this is when I understand that a lot of you in this audience are from industry. And so we really are here to serve. The purpose of standards is to enable equitable access to the global marketplace. If you look at the World Trade Organization, technical barriers to trade agreement, basically, most of the countries I'm sure who are represented in this call have signed that agreement. And so where we can, we use international standards so that we are enabling all countries to have access to the marketplace, in this case for biotech products. So those biotech products are continually increasing in complexity and diversity. And of course, the expectation is that product development cycle times will also follow as decreasing at the same time. So what can we do to still meet these needs as they keep increasing? In the case of biological materials and associated data, that is the materials that formulate the foundation of many biotech products, they need to be more characterized. They need to be probably predictable, arguably, more than anything. And we need to have assurance. Most users do require some assurance of biological materials, whether that is certified, and this is really what we're talking about today, or whether it is in industry's interest for a biobank to align with a standard. And again, that goes to the value proposition. And I see that a survey has popped up for everybody, so please take a moment and answer that. So how was ISO 20387 developed? Again, the motivation, as George has already said, robustness and reliability of research undertaken with BMaD, or biological materials and associated data. and we are supporting quality and reproducibility. The intent when this was developed was that biobanks could choose to pursue all or part of the standard. And there are many considerations for that. And again, I'll go through those a little bit more in a few slides. But to start off, we did a comparative analysis of what was out there. So what I'll call the biobanker's toolbox that was already there. There were a number of best practices and guidelines, some of which are listed here. And there are a number of conformity assessment standards. That is, standards that one has the ability to perform some kind of a conformity assessment to. It's a demonstration of competence. And these are the ones for which you can become accredited. Some of the gaps that were identified when we originally developed this umbrella standard, a lot of this is about interpretation for the biobanking community. Even when I started in standards, I underestimated how important it was that all the different countries actually understand each other, and all the users of the standard also, that they understand each other. And the standards, if nothing else, will provide that Rosetta Stone, if you will, providing an ability to have a back and forth conversation and continual feedback. The environment, the premises, the equipment, we've listed some of the factors, but there are a number of areas that we really felt had to be discussed, considered, and put out there and considered to within the development of ISO 20387. So I'm going to end this poll. And okay, and now can you see the results of the poll? Basically, it looks like we've got about 2/3 from Europe and the other third from North America in terms of our participation today. Okay, so ISO 20387 itself is a set of requirements. Any standard, by definition, is some agreed upon set of requirements. And in this case, we're talking about demonstration of competent biobank operation and the ability to provide biological material and associated data with appropriate quality. The main foci of the document as we were putting it together were two. The biological material and associated data objective was to enable robust and reliable research and development. And again, so a lot of this was ensuring that or really pointing out that the material itself is as important as its data, because anybody using it to do research and later to develop any kind of a product, if they don't have that complete understanding, they are not in a position to assure the performance of a particular product. And when you're looking at it from an industrial point of view, that's if one is going to assure a product, for example, through a warranty, that needs to have that assurance needs to be there from cradle to grave. The other focus of the document was that the materials, the biological materials and data, they needed to be fit for an intended purpose. And this was a very interesting concept for us to all understand on the same level. At the highest level, again, our definition of fitness for an intended purpose, and you'll see it as FIP other places, in line with prearranged requirements for an intended use. And the ultimate goal there is effective and efficient biobank operations, because those who are in the biobanks and those who are using the biobanks, it's always going to be something of a business decision. Even when it's run by a government, you're talking about, you're always talking about, by doing one thing, you perhaps are not doing another. So it's the best use of the available resources, and balancing that with a foreknowledge, and sometimes it's a prognostication of what you anticipate will be the needs of your users, even if you don't know who your users are on the day that you start to develop your work towards this standard. So the document itself has 8 sections, 8 clauses. There's terms and definitions, and then there are sections for each of the general areas looking at. So you're looking at everything from the environment and equipment to resources, that is people and things. You're looking at the process as well. And then you're also looking at quality management system requirements. So ISO 20387, I mentioned several other conformity assessment standards, but a conformity assessment standard is actually what I'll call a triple play of a typical ISO standard. So you've got your specific requirements to do with biobanking, as in ISO 20387. But since it's a conformity assessment standard, it has to have 2 other elements as well. There's a quality management system to ensure that you have the system in place, and all of the record keeping and the traceability, so that you know what you did, you know why you did it, and you can actually trace history and make sure that you maintain whatever needs to be maintained for your particular biobank. So this might be the equivalent of, many of you probably have ISO 9001. So ISO 9001 is a quality management system. So the requirements adhere are extremely similar to 9001. And then finally, there's technical competence. So a quality management system ensures that you have systems in place. Technical competence adds to that an evaluation of whether you can actually implement them for effective use in your organization. And so technical competence can be evaluated on several levels to determine whether you've got actual people who can basically be trusted to perform all of the necessary processes in a competent fashion. And again, what we're doing here is, with adding these levels to a standard, you're increasing user assurance. So this is just some general information about what a quality management system is. And again, for time's sake, I am not going to really go through this. But basically, we're looking at needs and requirements, and you're going to basically transfer that into different processes. And again, in this case, it's about facilitating the production of compliant biological material and associated data as your output, and understanding exactly how that gets done and keeping records of that. And then finally, the conformity assessment I talked about competence a few minutes ago. Conformity assessment is, again, it's evidence or it's attestation, but this can be done on 3 levels. At what we call first party is a self-declaration. I, Clare, have met the requirements of this, and I make a statement. Second party is an agreement. That might be somebody writes a contract with me and my biobank, and in that contract it states that I will follow these requirements. And then third party is when you actually do have a third party come in to put you through an assessment. And at the end of that assessment, which can be a multiple day task, they will declare, yes, indeed, this person, I should say this entity is accredited to ISO 20387 and in the following areas. So, excuse me. So in the following areas, so a scope of conformity is developed. And in that, you can include what biological materials and associated data is this biobank accredited for? What kind of biobanking activities, again, are in this accreditation, and what kind of procedures? So if you are a customer of say, a biobank or any other accredited institution, and many of these are testing, for example, is often an accredited activity, but you should check their scopes of conformity. These are publicly available to make sure that whatever service you're interested in is something that is accredited, if that's your requirement as your business. So here's really where we get to it. So implementation of ISO 20387 or any other, particularly conformity assessment standard, is a business evaluation. It's a value proposition. And so it really goes back to, as a biobank or as industry or a producer or user or university or anyone else, what does fitness for an intended purpose mean to you? And what do you think it will mean to the users of your biobank in this case? And so there are many factors that could be included in that set of considerations. And so what do your clients require? What is the risk tolerance here? So if we're talking about a biological material that's going to be used, say, eventually in a device that might go into a living being, that's a very risky prospect. And so your risk tolerance for your starting materials would be very low, I should imagine. How rare are the specimens? If it's the only specimen in existence, but you need something, so your requirements for what makes it fit for purpose might change. And again, factors such as environmental economic status, what is the specimen stability, that could fall into it. From the point of view of a biobank who is putting together these materials, their size, resources, and experience. Again, the business decision has to be within whatever the available resources are. Again, you're looking at the pace of scientific discovery, interoperability. Many times, the reason that you might need accreditation might be that you want to be interoperable and do some cooperative research with another biobank. But it's much more than just quality. So again, these are just some examples of some example answers why somebody might decide to either pursue ISO 20387 or use materials that are from an accredited biobank. So again, you're talking things like the demands of biotech products, the complexity. You need that characterization. You need that predictability. If you might be a biobank and you want to be as fit for purpose as you can be, regulations at some point may require it. From a business standpoint, we may want to use accredited materials because it demonstrates product differentiation from one's competitors. So there are a number of broad reasons why somebody might do this. And so just to summarize on the value proposition, for a biobank, you're balancing fitness for purpose versus the level of assurance required by your users against your available resources. For accreditation bodies, these are the bodies that would actually take ISO 20387 and offer the service of assessing a laboratory in order to potentially accredit it for a particular standard, such as ISO 20387. There, you want evidence of sufficient demand, and because they need to make an investment to set up a program. And they also need to have expertise among their assessors. And for industry and other users of these products, these materials, you have to consider what amount of assurance do you need for your particular purpose, and How well do you understand your own key requirements, and how well can you identify and communicate them to your source? That will definitely serve you well. And again, and what do you think the needs of your product users further down the chain will be? So a lot of this is getting to know each other and understand each other. So putting this in the higher context, we don't leave people to just do ISO 20387 and say, bye-bye. There are actually a number of tools that can work in a complementary fashion to ISO 20387 and other tools. And these are just some examples. But if we put this into, say, maybe go back here. Oops, I'm sorry. If we put this into four buckets, if you will, we've got organizational plans and resources, and these are things such as one's business plan that you'll have regardless of whether you're considering this. What do they say about what you need? And there's often helpful information in there about what kinds of requirements you should be setting for yourself, and what do you consider fitness for purpose. There are many best practices and guidelines, and George talked about some of those, and I have some of them listed in here. There are targeted tools and education. And for example, ISPR's has just released actually a biobank assessment tool that will basically help you to evaluate how well you are aligned with the ISPR best practices, and in part with ISO 20387 and other standards that are out there. And then you've got the standards and related documents. These are documents that actually have requirements in them. And again, these are just some of the examples of the types of things that fit these categories. So the path forward then, we will be continuing the implementation of ISO 20387. And some of that is really about the next steps that occur with a conformity assessment standard. I'll come back to this. Once a standard has been developed, there are actually quite a few other steps, because it's an international cooperation that is required in order to establish the reciprocity that would be associated with accredited standards. And so that takes years, because that's actually country agreements, or MRAs, to establish that reciprocity. And we're in the midst of doing that. I would say that in probably about a year, we will have that with in APAC, the Asia Pacific Accreditation Cooperation, and probably soon to follow in ILAC, which is the International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation. And again, this is all to create that infrastructure to enable the assessment. Again, the value proposition for everyone and its relation to existing standards. In the meantime, we will be continuing to do education and what I call vertical standards development. George and I both said that this is an umbrella standard that we're talking about, and there are a number of standards that have already been developed underneath it that are typically, not always, but many of them are related to specific types of materials. So there's animals, plants, stem cells, microbia are just some examples of that. There is also a implementation there's an implementation guide that can be purchased from ISO as well for this document, because there are so many aspects of it. And in addition to that, during 2023, there will be a revision of the document. And if you'd like to be involved in any of that or provide input, you'd be most welcome to. So I'd like to end by just showing you some of the resources, some of the many resources that are available for ISO 20387 awareness. And I look forward to speaking with you all and to answering your questions during the panel. Thank you so much for your attention.